Welcome comrades to 1984 Law, and today we tackle another intriguing question. Is demotion into the prole class possible for an outer party member? Having already considered the question of if promotion into the inner party is possible in another video, it was natural for me to consider the opposite. In some ways, demotion may not be a negative for the red-pilled outer party member. I suspect many other fans believe that a lot, if not the majority of outer party members, are likely less than genuine in their devotion to Big Brother and the principles of INGSOC, and given the hardships, severe surveillance, and constant threat of vaporization, surely a quieter, safer life as a prole has an overwhelming appeal. Well, for the genuine thought criminals of Winston's type, I would say that it certainly does. One of Winston's fantasies with Julia was to sink into a life as a prole, working a factory job and living out their lives in a backstreet. However, a disturbing reality of the world is that one can never truly know if anybody is awake. To answer the question outright, the law certainly implies that demotion is the result of a particularly unsuited outer party child. However, I believe that it's more likely that a grimmer fate awaits both the willing and unwilling demoted party member. Firstly, I erroneously say party member for the first type, but strictly speaking, all party members, both outer and inner, are individuals aged 16 and above, with the examination taken to determine entry into either branch at 16. I have already gone into what I believe the examination entails for inner party entry in my other video, so I won't go into this here. Children of both inner and outer party members are therefore not party members from birth, though they obviously live as effective dependent members for all intents and purposes. It's safe to assume, for example, that inner party children will enjoy the material benefits, housing, connections, and education of that class. We see the Parsons children live with their parents in the novel, which does suggest that by the time of the novel and before, this was still the status quo of child rearing for party members. Of course, we also know that there are organisations such as the Spies and Youth League, which are used to indoctrinate children into the ideology of the party early on. The Spies in particular are used to mould children into insidious, indirect agents of the thought police. These little sneaks, as Winston calls them, trained to monitor and expose their parents as thought criminals. We can assume that outer party children enjoy a similar material and educational advantage over proles as the inner party does over them, so a standard level of education is to be expected. We know this as the point of the middle or outer party is to act as the hands of the state, the effective civil service that enacts the directives of their inner party masters. This, of course, necessitates a degree of competency above that of an uneducated and likely illiterate prole, which means having a minimum standard of education at least. This, broadly speaking, probably ensures that the vast majority of outer party children can contribute in some fashion to the running of the state, with even less intelligent members like Parsons given appropriate, if limited, roles. Parsons is useful as he provides a good example here. Winston describes him as a man of paralysing stupidity, which if taken at face value implies that even children of below average intelligence can pass the examination and be assigned a role that has some use. To briefly digress, it's more difficult to determine Parsons' particular competency in my opinion than it first appears. Winston obviously has a dislike for him, and is also intelligent himself, which may prejudice his own estimation of Parsons' competency. Without delving too deeply into a Parsons rabbit hole, there's some evidence to suggest that this fool of the novel was not so foolish after all, but check out the dedicated Parsons video for more thoughts on this. Taking Winston's estimation of Parsons as valid, we can see that the party can likely find use for all but the most mediocre children. So will the rare, failed outer party child simply be allowed to regress into the ranks of the proletariat? This is merely my own educated speculation, but I think not. This is based on the party ideology concerning proles in the novel. Within the party, proles are not even regarded as human beings, the party holding so little concern for them as to categorize them alongside animals, which is seen with their slogan, "Proles and animals are free." However, this disregard is possible given the belief that nothing is to be feared from the proles alone, who are never able to perceive that there is a reason to revolt, let alone begin to organise to rebel. The party, in control of all media and information, never allows for a standard of comparison either with other states or with the past, giving the proles no way to compare their own horrid lot to know that they are particularly hard done by to begin with. Factor into all of this the myriad distractions the party provides them, allowing their pubs, promiscuity, gambling, including the lottery, illicit materials, prostitution and sports, as well as their own petty quarrels with neighbours. This enables the party to safely ignore the masses for the most part. However, allowing even mediocre children of outer party members into their ranks may prove problematic. As a rule, proles are also politically apathetic, only really being riled up every now and then into a patriotic fervour at public executions and rallies. However, the party never allows them to have sophisticated political views and does not attempt to indoctrinate them into the intricacies of INGSOC. Even failed outer-party children, however, will be very politically aware and active, many of these girls and boys likely having been spies or simply fully moulded into fanatical worship of Big Brother and the principles of INGSOC. Allowing such useless, from their perspective, young adults to intermingle with and potentially politicise the proles is very likely a complication that the party offsets by eliminating such failures. Sadly then, for such unfortunate young people, their fate is an early demise after a stint in the Ministry of Love. If they are fully orthodox and in no need of reprogramming in the manner of, say, Winston, then they may be mercifully, in some people's eyes, executed, their brains already being perfect, as O'Brien terms it, and so ready to be blown out. For similar reasons, the likelihood of voluntary demotion into the proletariat is either zero or adjacent to it. An interesting angle to firstly consider, however, is if the average outer party member would even want to live as a prole. Yes, Winston and Julia fantasize about it, and the class certainly enjoys freedoms any outer party member could only dream of. However, there are also drawbacks. Proles are expected to work the blue-collar jobs, the hard, back-breaking manual roles that outer party members are simply not raised to fulfill. There would be no cushy desk jobs as a prole. Perhaps the best one could do was find a managerial type of role in one of these professions. They are also materially much worse off than even outer party members, with disease and injury likely being worse. Another feature of prole life is the rampant criminality, with the class mostly left to its own devices in this regard, Winston noting that even the civilian police interfered sparingly. I also believe that there is likely a certain degree of animosity between the classes. Just as most outer party members likely secretly envy and despise inner party members, so do proles have negative feelings and attitudes towards the more visible outer party members, making integration difficult, if not impossible. There's also the prestige element to consider too. Imagine in our world asking a fairly well-to-do middle-class person if they wanted to work a manual job and give up a huge portion of their income. Would there be large queues to take up this offer? For all the negatives then, there is still the prestige of being a member of the party to consider, and the increased status, income, and material benefits that come with this. Not that any of this matters to the inner party. In truth, any outer party member who attempted to demote themselves by forgoing their jobs, homes, and party affiliation would simply expose themselves as effective thought criminals. To openly do this would be insane and entail certain vaporization. If any outer party members have tried to demote themselves surreptitiously, this would simply be viewed as an act of rebellion and thought crime. The implication by the act is that party membership is a negative, which we know it is, and that life as a prole is better. To allow such a move then would be for the party to acknowledge that this is the case. So aside from the fact that doing this would be exceedingly difficult to begin with, for more on this subject, check out my video on Winston's ways to escape. Any surreptitious attempt to live as a prole would be to signal opposition to the party. It would not be surprising to me if such a man or woman would also be labelled as a defector or saboteur, the offending individual removing themselves from their vital role as a party member to undermine the regime and the very structure of society itself. No doubt accusations of collaboration with foreign foes, or even Goldstein himself, would also be thrown in too. Another obvious thing to consider here too is the perceived threat of such an act, even if the act was somehow not perceived as a defection or defiance. Earlier we saw how even a mediocre young person from the outer party would be perceived as a potential threat, or at least significant numbers of them could be in the long term. So how much more of a threat would competent or even exceptional former outer party members be perceived as? It's likely then that even as average outer party members aren't stupid and know all of this, that attempted self-demotions are actually vanishingly rare, and that any such attempts would almost certainly fail and result in a prolonged stay in the Ministry of Love, followed by vaporization. Demotion, though implied by the law in principle, is very likely never an option, with the inner party and thought police in both scenarios we have considered simply eliminating such individuals. But what do you think? Are some outer party members allowed to sink into the ranks of the proletariat? Tell us all your thoughts in the comments section. And remember, proles and animals are free.